Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Paris and today we're going to be talking about my September reads and the books I plan on reading in October. I did do my fall TBR video, so any of the books that are on my TBR for October are most likely in my fall video. Let's get right into it. I have 6 books that I read this month and I got 3 5-star reads this month. Starting off strong in the month of September, I read The House of Eve by Sadeqa Johnson and I rated this 5 stars. I don't often read historical fictions, but I do love a historical fiction. This book is about 2 different women that live completely separate lives, but their lives interconnect in a way that they are completely unaware of. First, we have Ruby, who is the first in her family that plans on going to college. Ruby ends up in a bit of a forbidden love situation that can actually hinder her from attending college and achieving these goals that she has for her life. And then we have Eleanor, who is a college student at Howard University, and she meets William Pride, who is part of a more elite family. His mother doesn't approve of Eleanor and she is trying to find a way to bridge that gap between his family and her. And she thinks having a baby is the best way to do that. She comes to realize that having a baby is not as easy as she had hoped, and that is her situation. We definitely get a lot of talk about racism and colorism. There are some other topics that I would definitely look up trigger warnings for, especially if you're a mother or you are planning to be a mother. I would look up these trigger warnings for sure. I just really love this book. I was rooting for both the girls. It's one of those things where the end of the book kind of makes you happy but sad at the same time. I wasn't entirely surprised by the ending, but I don't feel like this book was meant to be like super shocking. I felt like it was really just meant to tell a story. It was just a very emotional book and I just really loved it. Next, I read 7 Days in June by Tia Williams, and I read this book from the library and I rated this 4 stars. In this book we have Eva and we have Shane, and Eva and Shane spent like a week together when they were teenagers and basically had like this really amazing connection, but they ended up not talking to each other for years. And they're both writers and they find out that they were writing about each other in each other's books. I just found like this book was a lot deeper than I expected it to be. I did hear people talk about it being a bit deep, but I feel like a lot of things are really left out when it comes to that book. They are 2 teenagers that are going through some very like depressive things in life, so they do things that are causing a lot of harm to their bodies. Take that as you will, but look up trigger warnings if you feel like you need to. A lot of people advertise this book as like a fluffy, steamy romance, but yes, it has those elements to it, but it is definitely deeper than that. I really felt the chemistry between the 2 characters, but at some point I started to think that their relationship was a bit unhealthy, especially as kids. Are they just relying on each other, or do they genuinely have feelings and want to like grow together, if you get what I mean? They were just 2 hurting people that needed each other. They needed someone to feel seen in some sort of way. I also felt like the last like 75 pages of the book for me felt very unnecessary. Even the epilogue was just unnecessarily long. I really did like it for the most part, and I am interested in reading more of Tia Williams' books. Next, I read The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. Fingerprints all over it, so we're just gonna take the dust jacket off. I read The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber and I rated this 5 stars. My last video is my reading vlog where I read this book and I just loved it so much. I read Once Upon a Broken Heart last month, well in August, and I rated it 3.75 stars. Looking back, I might just give it a 4, because again, a 3.75 is basically a 4. I'm just being dramatic. This book gave me everything that I needed from the first book, but I do understand when it comes especially to fantasy books that the first book can be a lot slower. It can be more of a build-up. I love Stephanie Garber's writing. Stephanie Garber just writes this magical world in such a beautiful way. Like everything I'm picturing in my head, I feel like I'm in Alice in Wonderland, like an Alice in Wonderland, like Candyland type of world, and it's just so cool. I got a lot of like mystery vibes from this book. We were trying to solve like riddles. People were saying things and you're trying to understand what they mean by it, and it was just so much fun. I really did love this book and I am so excited for the next book. A Curse for True Love comes out at the end of this month and I am ready. That day I'm going in the store and buying it. I didn't even say what this book is about because I don't really think I can say much about this book if you haven't read Once Upon a Broken Heart. Next, I read Out on a Limb on Kindle Unlimited by Hannah Bonam-Young, and that book was also in my reading vlog as well. I know a lot of people hate accidental pregnancy. I don't really mind it depending on how it's done, but I saw a lot of amazing reviews for this book, so I was like, okay, why not just try it? I gave this book 3 stars. It was just like a palate cleanser for me. I enjoyed the story. It did what it needed to do. I needed something where I wasn't thinking very much. It did have a disability rep. We have the main character Win, who has an underdeveloped hand, and we have Bo, who's an amputee. We have these 2 people who had a one-night stand and they just really connected that night. Win ends up pregnant by surprise, and they're trying to like navigate how to be strangers and parents at the same time. It's one of those things where both the characters had amazing communication. We didn't have any like third act conflict or anything like that. It just flowed right through the book and we got to the end. Next, I read The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. I've talked about this book already in my last vlog, on my Instagram, on my TikTok. So you might already know I rated this book 5 stars. I loved this book so much. Every time I talk about it, I just can't help but feel so emotional. I didn't expect to love this book as much as I did. I do love Selena. I think that knowing her backstory makes me really enjoy who she is in the Throne of Glass book as well. We have a lot more to unpack about Selena for sure. The Assassin's Blade consists of 5 novellas, and Sarah J. Maas wrote the first 4 novellas, I know for sure, before Throne of Glass. She was releasing them leading up to the release date for Throne of Glass. So she intended for readers to read it prior to reading Throne of Glass. But the thing that happened is all of these novellas got put together as one whole book and came out after Throne of Glass was already released. I think like after the first 2 or 3 books were released. I don't want to get too deep into the whole reading order thing, but I feel like it matters right now. It's a very controversial topic, especially on TikTok. My TikTok that I posted saying how much I loved reading this first, I got a few people defending their decision to read this book like 3rd or 4th, and that's fine. I don't have any issues with what people choose to do with their books and what they choose to do when it comes to like reading a series in a certain order. That is your business, that's fine. I just personally feel like if you're trying to decide which way to go when it comes to reading the book, it really depends on the type of reader you are. I just know who I am as a reader. I like reading a backstory on characters. I've mentioned so many times, I read Caraval before I read Once Upon a Broken Heart. I love Caraval. I am so glad that I got to experience Jack's prior to Once Upon a Broken Heart, because that's how his life went chronologically. I do know that some of these novellas consist of characters that will show up later on in the Throne of Glass series, and I'm okay with that. I don't find that as a spoiler, and some people say that means it's a spoiler. I don't think I got much from the side characters that showed up in this book anyways for me to feel like anything was spoiled. I just feel like it's more fun to know things about people and then connecting dots as you're going through the series. I also didn't like the idea of reading a couple of the books and then going back and reading this. I just didn't want to do that personally, so I was totally fine with starting with this one. If you don't want to start with this one, don't start with it. I will say, if you do read Throne of Glass before reading this one, you're going to know immediately something that happens at the end of this book, which completely broke my heart. I guessed what was going to happen at the end of this one, but I still was left so heartbroken. I've heard people are still heartbroken reading this one after knowing already. So after reading The Assassin's Blade, of course, I went into Throne of Glass. I gave this 4.25 stars. I really love this book. This is future me. I literally came out of filming the video and I realized I didn't even explain what Throne of Glass is even about. So Throne of Glass is basically about this girl named Selena Sardothian. Selena is an assassin who ends up being imprisoned. She is basically like summoned to the king, and the king is looking for a champion. He's looking for someone to basically be his assassin. So she is competing with other assassins and thieves and just people who are criminals for this title to be the king's champion. So while Selena's in the middle of these trials, some of the other competitors start to die mysteriously, and she's learning that there is some kind of evil going on in this castle. But that's what the book is about. Continue on. I can see why some people feel like this book is a bit slow. Not a lot is happening, and then eventually a lot starts to happen. I do think we'll get a lot more of Selena's like badass type of energy in the next couple books, but this one I definitely think it was a little more tame. I absolutely love the dynamic amongst the characters. I fell in love with Dorian on page 7. You meet Dorian literally page 7. I'm so excited to get deeper in this series, and that ties into now my October TBR. I'm reading the Throne of Glass series, so I just started Crown of Midnight. This is book number 2 and I'm already enjoying it. I'm only about like 62 pages in. It's fun, it's exciting, I love where it's going already. I do want to just kind of binge through the series, but because it is an 8-book series, it's hard for me to think about all the other books I want to read this month. I do have Heir of Fire. This is when the books start to get a little bit thicker, so these 2 books definitely need to read this month. Next, I have Powerless by Lauren Roberts, and I bought this book on Amazon. I believe this is actually the UK published version. It will now be published in the US and Canada in November. I've heard a lot of people say that this book contains a lot of elements that people love from like other fantasy books, so I'm excited. So we have ordinaries and elites, and the ordinaries are banished from the kingdom. The main character in this book is an ordinary that lives amongst the elites. Then we have the prince who actually hunts for ordinaries. So we got an enemies to lovers or like forbidden love situation going on here, so I'm excited. Next, I have Rock Paper Scissors by Alice Feeney, and I feel like everyone who likes thrillers has read this book already. I plan on reading this soon. I do really want to do a reading thrillers for a week video, so this will probably be in that vlog. I don't know too much about this book, but I do really want to go in blindly, especially with thrillers. I feel like when you know too much, it can ruin the experience. Then I have The Inmate by Frida McFadden, and I really want to read this book this month. I've heard some really great things about this book. Because I don't really have like a regular contemporary romance in this list, I'm going to share 2 contemporary romances that I have here. I don't know if I'm going to get to these because I really am in like that fantasy mood right now, but these are just going to be on my TBR because why not? I have Forget Me Not by Julie Soto. Then I have Mickey Chambers Shakes It Up by Cherish Reed. This one is about a woman who's like a professor or a teacher of some sort, and she also needs a second job on the side, so she gets a job at a bar. Who owns the bar? The guy who is actually in her class that she is teaching in the summer. So he is her student and her boss at the same time. Then, like I said, I have Forget Me Not by Julie Soto. I saw this book starting to blow up a little bit online, and I believe this is about a wedding planner and a florist, and I think it's also a second chance romance, but this one, the girl broke his heart. So I don't know, I've heard good things about this book, so I'm interested in it. I'm gonna see what I can do this month. We're gonna try our best. It's gonna be a bit of a challenge, but I'm taking it on anyway. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've read any of these books or these are books that you want to read in the upcoming months as well, please let me know. If you are not subscribed, please do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.